Okay, we're ready to go live and welcome to the Wisdom Talk. Raghu is also just here and connecting. Yeah, great. We are live and we are ready to begin. Uh, just getting a few things here and there done. Um, Typically, in tradition of Wisdom Talks, for the first half an hour or so, we're going to disable the chat just to make sure that the focus is on the conversation, and then we'll reopen the chat. Hello, Raghu.
Hi. Sorry, I went into a rigmarole. I thought I had clicked the wrong thing and I didn't know what to do.
Absolutely no problems, Raghu. We are ready to begin.
Yeah.
And should we just hop right in?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. So thank you so much, firstly, for coming and joining us for one more conversation. We've had lots of interesting conversations over these years, and this is one more. Uh, and Just for people who are watching on Facebook and here, Raghu is a teacher to me and to many people, and has several decades of in-depth work and in-depth experience with yoga and with ideas around Indic philosophy as well. And he's like a teacher to so many of us, so it's great to be in conversation with him. He's very generous with his knowledge and his ideas. So thank you. What a lovely occasion to have a wisdom talk with you. So, yeah, Raghu. So let me start with our traditional question, a question that we begin always with, which is, what do you think constitutes wisdom according to you? What is wisdom? Let's
Mm.
begin with that.
There are many ways of looking at it. One of the nicest definitions that I've heard is what Professor Pullengarg used to say. He said that when the head and the heart meet, there is wisdom.
When the head and the heart meet.
Heart meet. So, and J. Krishnamurti has made a very interesting statement. He says, can you think with your heart and feel with your head? Yeah, I think these are all very interesting ways of looking at wisdom.
Think with your heart and feel with your head.
Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah,
So the coming
but
together of head and heart, would you
head
say?
and heart, absolutely, there's no doubt about it. And also, with I think along with it, there's an understanding of limitation of the human mind in general, and particularly of one's own.
Hmm, 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 hmm. And in what ways would you, since mind and the brain and thinking is kind of the primary de facto mode for so many of us, what would you say are limits that we should be aware of about the mind?
No, very simple, yeah. The lots of things in Indian philosophy which very clearly talk about the limitations of our brain in understanding the whole universe. Na? It's a very simple thing, and it simply says that what you can comprehend with your senses and with your manas and all of that is a very small part of the universe, right? The universe is immense. And then, based on what we can gather from this, and today we have extended it a little bit, yeah. So we get a little more information than we can just with our eyes and ears and so on. With that limited information, we try and construct ideas and models and this and that, as though any construct like this can actually encompass the absolutely complex reality of what's happening. And most scientists will agree with this, that even what we know about the human body and so on is very small compared to the complexity of the whole system. So any person who goes into a study of a subject with intensity and so on will very clearly know the limitations of knowledge, the limitations of what the human mind can comprehend.
Sure. So, in your in your long journey here, Raghu, you must have met a lot of intelligent people and a lot of wise people. How can
Sure.
you tell? How can you tell somebody is wise and somebody is just intelligent?
Two things, Abhishek. One, wise people. I've rarely seen wise people do anything which is self-centered. I've, I, None of the people whom I can remember, whom I would consider wise, have I seen doing anything that is extractive, that is in any way self-centered. But I've met a lot of so-called intelligent people who use their intelligence for a lot of self-aggrandizement, extraction, and things like that. Yeah. So the difference is very clear and very simple.
And the other, you said two things. I was wondering. So one was
Which
this.
one?
The You said two things. I was wondering, is there
The
another
other
one or
is
this is
that
the?
intelligent people think they understand the world. Wise people never, they never think they understand the world.
Sure, sure. They're still in mystery and awe and wonderment.
Yeah, they can experience awe and wonderment and all of that quite easily.
So I really wonder, though, that is wisdom on the other side of intelligence, in the sense, does one have to walk through the whole path of knowledge and acquiring it and then de-acquiring it, or is it something that's
No,
instantly
I think it's
accessible?
just no. I think it's just a matter of where your heart is.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. Some of the wisest people I've met are people I've met when I've been doing developmental work in the grassroots.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. So-called villagers and people like that who have such a lot of wisdom in them and compassion for the world and things like that. It's quite humbling.
So almost
In
nothing to
fact,
do with
I
knowledge.
very little to do with knowledge. They have knowledge in their own in their own ways. Now they would know a hell of a lot about maybe agriculture, whatever. It's not that they don't have knowledge.
Hmm. Hmm.
This is another very stupid notion, na? That only what constitutes westernized knowledge is knowledge,
Hmm. Hmm.
and other types of knowledge are not considered knowledge.
True. True.
Yeah, so if you have a lot of knowledge, let's say in Sanskrit, and you don't know how to speak English, you'd be referred to as a native informer for somebody to write a paper on, who may know nothing about what you're talking about, but because that person knows English and knows how to write a paper with all the necessary jargon in it, they're
Right.
considered knowledgeable.
True. True.
This kind of stuff has been going on for a long time. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
anything
yeah,
new.
yeah. Also, I would imagine that the way of knowing is first-hand experience, right? For wise people, how they know is through their
See, the
experience.
problem, Abhishek, is when you use the word knowledge and we speak in English, no, there's a
Hmm.
huge conflation,
Okay.
right? Because in the yogic tradition, in particular, there are other traditions that use these words slightly differently.
Hmm. Hmm.
Book knowledge is called pandityam,
Okay.
right? Then there's another word called jnanam. Jnanam is a deeper understanding of oneself, how one uses one's capabilities and all that. Jnanam is slightly closer to wisdom, right? And then there are other words like vijnanam and things like that. So vijnanam is an ability which is like a scientific mind, capable of categorizing things correctly, understanding things without conflation, right? Understanding each thing for what it is, yeah, that kind of a thing. So jnanam and vijnanam might be kind of at a similar level compared to pandityam.
Okay.
In
Okay.
pandityam, I know nothing. I'm just regurgitating what has been told to me,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
right? There is no original thinking.
Sure. Sure.
Okay. Now, then there is something called prajnanam. So, in the yogic tradition, prajnanam is an ability to remain anchored in deep shantam and be able to see the whole subtle movement of the mind, subtle movements of the dynamics happening around, and so on. So, knowledge, a knowledge in English sounds like an artifact,
Yes.
whereas all of these words are processes.
Right. Right.
Right? Even the word vidya, people constantly equate vidya with knowledge. Vidya and knowledge are slightly different because the word vidya has in it the element of action.
Okay. Okay.
So vidya is that which you act upon. If I translate it, whatever, if I give it a longer, this thing, vidya is not just knowledge. Vidya is a knowing that I act upon. So it's got that action vector built into it.
It's almost seeming to be like when we are talking in English, we are trapped in a set of words which don't let us connect to
Yeah, the living
several
process.
distinctions.
No, they don't easily connect to the living process because the language itself is not process based. It's noun based.
Right. Right.
It's thing based. Whereas all Sanskrit based Indian languages are verb and process based.
True. So would you, just on a side note, would you suggest that our generation should develop a fusion language which allows picking words and using them from our mother tongues and
No,
while using.
you I don't think there is any question that when we lose our mother tongue, we lose a hell of a lot. There's no question about it. And this has been scientifically proven also. A lot of studies, any person, not just from India, from anywhere in the world. I think until the age of 7 or 8, when you learn the basic math and when you learn all of this, learning in your mother tongue makes your brain work much better, much faster. Right? There's something about the emotive content of it and the whole context in which the learning happens. Right? Today in India, there's a problem because if you are very fluent in your mother tongue, you're considered a dumb guy. Right? If I'm fluent in English, I'm considered somehow more intelligent than somebody who's fluent in Tamil or in Hindi. We've been deeply colonized, nah?
Sure.
So we're actually screwing ourselves up because I've met some extremely intelligent, wise people on the ground in India, much wiser. I mean, I've done work on the factory floor in India, and I've done some teaching abroad. Right, the average Indian worker is very intelligent. What we derisively call jugad is just very sharp, very deep understanding of things. I've not met this kind of people on the American shop floor, for example.
For us, though, Raghu, then would you say that we need to reclaim our, I mean, obviously you're saying we need to reclaim our mother tongues. Also, given that English is a link language, how are we then to navigate that?
What are we linking through English? Come on, Abhishek. I mean, look at the discourse in the media today. English is hardly a linking language, man. It's a delinking.
Divisive, it's a divisive
It's
language too.
extremely device. So it's got nothing to do with the language. It's also got to do with the mind that is using the language
Ah, okay,
and the
got it.
kind
Got
of discourse, right? The current discourse what I'm talking about. The current discourse is about not respecting your mother tongue, not respecting your roots, right?
Yes, yes.
And considering only a Europeanized developmental model as, the more Europeanized, the more developed you're supposed to be. and so on. So there's a whole discourse around this, which is extremely destructive of all native peoples all over the world. And I think it's basically a colonizing process.
And for us, the journey is to decolonize and to
Yeah, yeah,
reclaim
yeah.
a lot of these
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
roots.
It's yeah, yeah, yeah. It's much easier for a colonizing nation to colonize you if you think they're great and you're not. No?
Sure, sure, absolutely. And the language, that if it's an imported language we are using, that becomes an instrument for that colonization further, then, unless we
Not
are
just
aware.
no, Abhishek. It's not just the imported language. It's an imported idea of yourself.
Hmm, hmm,
Yeah, we have not put in enough effort to develop a meaningful idea of ourselves based on our own experience, based on our own wisdom, and so on.
hmm, hmm. I'm wondering, from this idea to of self, since we thought this is a conversation about shadows, and
Hmm.
because we've had a whole range of conversations about so many different themes,
Hmm.
uh, can we move from the idea of self to look at shadows as a part of myself, and really where does that sit in my idea of self? And since we're talking about an imported idea of self itself, uh, just wondering if that is a space from where we can go to see if the idea of shadows can kind of surface in some way.
Sure. Um, hmm. See, first of all, I think we ought to be clear that the idea of shadow has been around in Indian mythology for a long, long time. I think it's there in all mythologies. It's definitely there in Indian mythology, and the idea of having to enter these deep inner spaces, which you normally don't look at, is the key idea in the Mahabharata. When you go into the Ajnatavasa for the 1 year,
Mm-hmm.
each of them, each of the five heroes and Draupadi go into an a self that would be the least experienced, which would be complete. Like they, first of all, they become servants from being kings and queens, right? And each of them has to enter that area of themselves which has been the most troublesome. Like Yudhishthira has to become a gambler. That has been, his shadow side, which caused the greatest problem, a compulsive side of himself he couldn't handle. So he destroyed his life. He destroyed the lives of people who depend on him, right? So that is what shadows do. Shadows just come and take over yourself because you've never looked at it, you don't know how to handle it. It just becomes a compulsive takeover of yourself, and you end up doing things which you might regret later, but you cannot stop at that point of time. They have a tremendous power, right? And so the whole Mahabharata is about those 13 years, is about preparing, understanding the self, and finally coming face to face with that part of yourself which is held in the deepest, darkest corners of your mind.
By actively engaging with it, like
Yeah, by
by
actively engaging with it and understanding it, that's also a part of your energy, not something foreign to you. So if I do not deeply understand all the factors of my inner energy, when some of these get triggered off, they'll take over, na?
sure. And is that the sign then that when I am in a compulsive grip, or when I feel taken over by something, it's that shadow side, or
That's
that
the shadow side. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which
Today,
for
people are talking about shadow as though it's their, close cousin or uncle or something. They take a pack of cards and then they put the card like this and say, "This is a shadow side" and all that. It's a very diluted understanding of the word shadow. Shadows are very powerful entities that take over. They're a part of me. They're a part of myself, which I'm so afraid to touch. that I tried to banish it. Yeah, like for example, the Pandora's box story. Right, very, very beautifully structured. Yeah, the Pandora is the wife of Epimetheus. Right, there are two people, brothers, Prometheus and Epimetheus. Prometheus is somebody who thinks before he acts. Epimetheus is the one who thinks, who's self-reflective, and so on. Right? So he tells Pandora, there's a box inside the cellar of my palace. Never open that. Right? And it's in this corner room, whatever. So when he goes away, she's so taken up with curiosity that she goes there and opens the room, which is a very dark room, and opens this box. And out of it come all kinds of demons and all kinds of things, at the end of which hope comes out. The last bird to fly out is hope.
It's hope. Okay.
It's a very beautiful story. This is a story about the shadow. So if one does not know how in your self-reflectivity, if you don't know how to touch, see, when you act, right, you're just focusing on something and you're acting. It's difficult to also be deeply in touch with yourself. Right? So you plan something, you intend to do something. In the context, there are so many forces that are at play, right? And you don't
Yes.
know what is triggering you, and something triggers you and you act. Now, it's very important, like Epimetheus, to have an ability to sit back and reflect, which is what in the Gita is talked about in the 6th chapter, which I'm translating into saying, in doing what I'm doing, what am I really doing? How do I look at the karma, the akarma, the vikarma, and so on? This is a very nice thing. And before that, in the same chapter, if I remember right, there's this whole process that is talked about how the mind, which is caught with kama, which is caught with raga, and so on, moves step by step into becoming so consumed that you get into what is called smriti vibhramshamaha, which means you just forget who you are, you just forget everything, and you get taken over by this energy. Right. So the process of self-reflection to understand where it's coming from is a very critical part of one's ability to engage with the world in a way that is meaningful. But what happens is you're so scared of this part that you never even enter it and never look at it properly. That's the
Yes.
problem.
That, and also, Raghu, it sounds like very slippery territory in the sense, how do I stay anchored? If I say explore my shadow, I go into it, say my shadow is anger, and if I try and more deeply engage with it,
Anger is not a shadow, Abhishek. Anger is a capability.
then what
Okay.
would be
Cruelty is in the Yoga Sutra is very clear. Kama, Krodha, Moha, Lobha, Mada, Matsarya.
calm, growth,
Krodha is
lobh?
cruelty, Lobha is, yeah,
Hmm, hmm, hmm,
uh, whatever, lust and so on.
hmm, hmm, hmm.
These are compulsive things which are very negative. Anger is not negative. You need anger to beat up people who are not doing the right thing. What's the
And
problem with
get into
anger?
action. So let's take lust, for example. And when I engage with this idea of lust, then what the invitation is, what to engage with the shadow, to reflect, to do what? So,
See, we'll have to take a step back
okay.
to understand that. No? It's the reason why in yoga we use the word swadhyaya,
Hmm,
yeah, as swa adhyayane, yeah, getting closer and closer to your true self.
hmm, hmm,
Right?
hmm,
Initially, you think that swa, the self, is your constructed self.
hmm, hmm,
But what you're doing is you're taking a whole set of energies that are available to you as a child or whatever, and then you actually shape some part of it into something acceptable, something that's been trained into affirmation, through affirmation, and all of these socializing processes into saying, this is me. And there are other parts of yourself that also get triggered in a context which you say is not me. Okay. And if you get too caught with the current processes of individualization and so on, and if you get caught with, the Abrahamic myths of looking at the world, there's a split between good and evil. There are binaries. You start splitting the world into binaries. Yeah, in the Yoga Sutra, what it says is, so long as you live in the world at a very superficial level, your mind can get caught with binaries. You look different from me, right? Somebody else can look different from me. So I can then, therefore, if I get caught with the superficial level of reality as though it's the whole of reality, I make all kinds of problems and issues. Fundamentally, I can easily fragment myself from the whole rather than understand that I'm part of the whole. Right? The moment this fragmentation starts and othering starts, then many processes of disowning of oneself also begin. And you start putting those disowned parts of yourself onto others. Right? So the enemy is always painted in all of those colors that are negative. So you bomb them. Your bombing is considered heroic. Their bombing is considered villainous.
Yes.
So the same energy that I call villainous in them is what is prompting me to go and beat the shit out of the other person and kill them. But I don't own it up. I justify it. I valorize it in so many ways. Yeah, and this process happens pretty early in life. Yeah, see, for example, when we are told stories, no? Right? You take the Mahabharata, you take any of these stories. You're taught this story saying Pandavas are good guys and Kauravas are bad guys. That's not Swadhyaya. That is moralizing and screwing up the story for you. Because it's a very simple thing, Abhishek. If when I read the story, not when I watch it on television, when I read the story, I am conjuring up all these characters. Okay, so Duryodhana is a product of your mind. Bhima is a product of your mind. Right? And deep inside you that both Bhima and Duryodhana are exactly the same person. If you remove certain motivations of their actions, if you stop calling it good and bad, it's the same energy. It's the energy of a warrior of a certain kind. Okay. Now, if I read the story and I own up to the fact that both of these people and the other characters are all coming out of my mind, then it's the beginning of being able to look at various facets of myself and say, yeah, this is also possible, this is also possible, this is also possible. And start owning up my multiplicity. But if after I read the story, I'm given an upadesha saying you should not be like the Duryodhana is a lousy guy, you should only be like Bhima, then you're taught to split yourself and accept parts of yourself and start disowning other parts of yourself. And then you start learning how to push these under the carpet. Usually, when you push parts of yourself under the carpet, they grow. Yeah. The only way to dissolve these parts is to step back and be able to see that all of this is part of me. And I am making a choice of whether to deploy my capabilities based on dharmic principles or on envy. I can get triggered by envy, right? So that is Duryodhana. The same me that gets triggered by love is Bhima. So it's the same self, right? So that part of me which can get triggered, let's say through envy and jealousy, is then pushed into the Pandora's box.
Right.
So I split myself. I create all kinds of inner conflicts within myself.
Rather than
Try to
owning all
kill,
of myself.
yeah,
Yeah.
and try to kill parts of myself. Whereas they're just part of me. So I'm just, you know, reinforcing it actually through this process.
Yes. I think on that note, one thing that comes to me is the Mahabharat immersion. We have
Hmm.
one of these Mahabharat immersions coming up, from what I gather,
Ah,
also.
yes, yeah,
And
online. Yeah, we're trying it out.
transformational
Yeah,
program that
yeah,
was
it's
we.
very very powerful. Correct. It
Yes,
helps you.
I.
There
Yeah.
you have to enact all the
Yes,
characters, right,
yes.
Abhishek, to
I remembered
understand.
Dushasan. That's why I remembered my portrayal of Dushasan when we were talking and
Hmm.
what it was. So,
Yeah,
yes, it's a very beautiful program, and I would recommend everyone who's seeing here to go and try it out and just experience it. I think it's just beyond description. It's an experience in itself. So, I am a beneficiary of what that program let me explore in full body, not just conceptually. I
yeah,
think that
not
for me
conceptual.
was
Absolutely.
very very powerful. And when you were sharing, that came to me when we were enacting that
That's right.
part out.
That's right.
It
Yeah.
evoked all of that. So that's lovely to know. Uh, so Raghu, from here, I thought. So just one question before that. When you named the six from the Yoga Sutras, you said anger is not one of them. You said
Yeah.
cruelty is one of them. Lust is
Yeah.
one of them.
Hmm.
Which would be the other four? So cruelty, lust,
Kama, Krodha,
anger.
Moha.
No,
Mohar,
Krodh would not be
Krodha
anger.
is
Right? It's
cruelty.
cruelty. Right.
Cruelty.
Right.
Right? Raudra is different from
Krodh.
Krodha.
Okay. So
Raudra
Krodh.
is an arousal. When somebody is doing something wrong, there's part of you that gets aroused in a certain way, which is a useful thing. Yeah. Kama, Krodha, Moha. Moha is a kind of a depressive state.
Not attachment. Really, a depressive state.
Depressive state. Yeah. Moha, Mada. Mada is like getting, uh, you know, impassioned in a negative way. It's Madam.
Like
Like
being
a mad
indifferent
elephant.
almost.
No, no, no.
Or
It's mad, going mad over something like a mad elephant.
okay, okay.
Madam, Matsaryam. Matsaryam is envy and jealousy and all that. Have we covered it?
Five. We've covered envy,
Five.
jealous. Huh.
Yeah. Uh, we talked about kamam. Na? Kamam is
Huh.
excessive desire.
Right, right, right. Excessive desire. So the one that
So
captive. Huh.
a certain amount of desire, which is balanced, is a good thing.
Right, right. So the one that captivates me, Raghu, is the depression, madam or madam. I think you said
Moham. Moham.
moham,
Hmm.
and so just want to explore a little bit of that because I feel there seems to be an epidemic of at least felt depression, and I'm wondering if that is unowned sadness or what is.
Yeah. Disowned grief, disowned sadness. It could be a combination of many things where you get so drawn into yourself and so withdrawn from the world because of these feelings getting generated. You don't know what to do with it, so you try to shrink away in a sense.
Right. So the
So you
what
stop
is
engaging with the world and you cover yourself up with darkness, hoping to hold this down.
almost like wanting to be safe, but in that wanting to be
Right.
safe, I sink further and
You
further.
sink further and further and further.
But that's also because the world is the way I relate to the world then is so scary or so traumatizing that I react to it in that way. Right.
Correct.
My perception of
Correct.
the world is almost skewed, where I'm seeing what is
Correct.
wrong and getting more and more.
Correct. And the more you get into it, the more you misunderstand the world and so on.
Right, because the perception further becomes distorted more and more and more.
Distorted. And I start living inside my own constructed world. Actually, one of the big problems with the COVID and people not going out and experiencing other people is the possibility of getting caught with your own constructed universe is very high.
Hmm. Hmm.
See, my talking to you over this medium is very different from my meeting you,
Yes.
right? Because there are so many other facets of you that don't get communicated just through the voice.
Yes.
Or, I'm seeing you like a matchbox, no, just your
Yeah.
face.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I actually can't experience your body energies. So there's so much of me that you can't experience. There's so much of you I can't experience, right? So I can take whatever you're saying and put it into my construct very easily. So
Hmm.
I keep reinforcing my constructs. If you're there physically, right? If this is happening, there will be a tension that I can feel. Even if I'm a little sensitive,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
more I'm putting things into my own construct, I'll feel a tension with you.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
My
Hmm.
body will feel the tension. So if I'm sensitive, I can expand it out, I can open it out.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. Whereas in this medium, that's difficult. And then if you're only staying with the same people, if you're only staying in a limited space, you're just reinforcing that one experience of the world over and over and over again.
Hmm. Hmm. So it's sounding like having deep dialogues with diverse people seems to be a pathway to break free
Absolutely.
from one's limited perception of
Absolutely.
things.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And would you also say exposing myself to situations where I am likely to be triggered as an opportunity to actually
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
test
Yeah, that's
myself and see?
why that is why Atithi Devo Bhava.
Hmm. Hmm.
Atithi is strangers. Atithi are strange, different experiences.
Wow. Okay.
So that Deva just means energy. It just means good energy,
Hmm.
right? So just as your parents have given you certain energy and helped you to grow up, and your teachers do that, unless you expose yourself to completely different new contexts,
Wow. Hmm.
you don't grow. There's no new fresh prana coming in.
That's beautiful. That's a really lovely one too. Never thought of Atithi Devo Bhava in that light. So that's lovely, Raghu. One last question, and then I want to open up the chat room also, so that participants can also then share their reflections and questions. Just to tie this back to when we were talking about the imported idea of the self, we segued into shadow at the point where you were saying that from the West we have a certain idea of I and self, which is limited, which is splitting into binaries, and which looks at good, evil as literally two, me as good, the other as evil, and all of that. And just looking at where we are in India right now, uh, and we've had this conversation earlier also about the our our cultural roots, and then in the current times as we are experiencing a polarization, any thoughts on that? Is it our collective shadow then that we have to work through, or
Of
what is?
course. Yeah, of course. Yeah. See, let me see how to put it. See, one of the things that has happened because of colonization is you hold your Indianness itself in the shadow, right? So if I show you how indigenous I am,
Hmm.
I'll give you a simple example. Now, when I was in IIT, we had a very clear distinction between those guys who could sing Dylan and Simon and Garfunkel and the so-called lungis.
Hmm. Hmm.
Lungis are people who wear the dhoti in the hostel. Okay, I also wear a dhoti at home, but I wouldn't be seen wearing a dhoti in the hostel because I will be called a lungi, right? So my presentation of myself in college was of somebody who sings Dylan, who sings SNG, who can play a guitar and so on. So right, I also love Carnatic music. So one day I went for a Carnatic concert wearing my veshti and whatever. So one of the so-called lungi friends of mine were there. He said, "Dave, what are you doing here?"
Hmm.
So I said, "I love this music, so I'm here." Right. But right, for him it was a great surprise that I was there. And back in IIT, okay, if I went back to the hostel and if I started, I mean, after a point of time, I didn't care, but this is the reality. If I start talking to him in Tamil, okay, I would be considered less hip. I wouldn't be considered part of the elite,
Mm, mm, mm,
right? As I would be if I knew, you know, if I loved Carnatic music, I'm not elite. So
mm,
what will happen if I take this kind of this? All these are parts of mind colonization. So if I take this narrative of mine seriously, what will I do? I'll turn around and say, you know what? Indian music, Indian art is all shit. Only Western music and Western art is great. Yeah, I actually
yes.
had I had my dad telling me this. You know, all these Western sculptures are so great and this and that. And then when I started getting very interested in art and when I started studying more about it, the picturization of heroes in the Indian context, like a Nataraja, is such a complex figure. It talks about time, it talks about so many things, and Greek figures are static,
Mm,
right? Now, I had to fight my dad to be able to say, sorry, yeah, your understanding of art, I'm not going to internalize,
mm, mm, mm.
right? Otherwise, I'd have taken it in and, expounded the same dislike and maybe hate for what is Indian. So that part of me, which is Indian, then starts becoming more and more suppressed till it
Mm.
becomes a shadow part.
Right, right.
So we're in danger of doing that. And the other thing that I find very strange and very difficult is the word polarization is a wrong usage.
Okay.
See, if you have a North Pole and a South Pole, if you cut it, you'll still have a North Pole and a South Pole.
Right.
So polarization is a reality of of life. There's man and woman, there's this and that, there's day and night and all of that, right? So if you cannot talk about polarization as though the other is polarizing.
Mm, mm,
What am I doing then? I'm saying I'm only North Pole and the world can be full of North Poles and there's no need of a South Pole. So I'm very happy if people really understand polarization and start dialoguing.
mm, mm,
Problem is the people are using words like polarization are creating exclusivisms and othering. So rather than clearly say I'm othering you and you're othering me, we are using a wrong word.
mm, 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 mm,
I wish we were more polar and understood that you and I are parts of the same reality.
mm, mm.
We just show different aspects of it, then we can have a dialogue,
Yes, yes.
right? We are creating exclusivist clubs. Why are we are fragmenting? Why are we fragmenting? To exploit.
Is it not out of fear, or you're saying to exploit each
Fear,
other
yeah, to exploit each other. Fear,
and scarcity, an internalized sense of scarcity, maybe, or
internalized sense of
acquisition?
scarcity, need for acquisition. Right. If I think you're a decent human being, it's very difficult for me to exploit from you. So if you see every colonizing story, yeah, the Vietnamese were called geeks and they were called all kinds of bad names. The idea you have of Africans, right, is a colonized idea. Some of the greatest civilizations have been in Africa. Timbuktu had as many books as Alexandria had, right? Benin was a very, very rich country, right? So there are so many realities like this, which most Indians wouldn't know. They would think
Mm,
Africa is a dark continent. What the hell, dark continent, man?
mm.
Yeah,
Right.
all the copper you want, all the lead and whatever, all the minerals you want, you steal from there and pay very little, and you call it a dark continent. What are you talking about, right? if I call you a human being, I would not be able to exploit you like this. I wouldn't be able to unleash genocides on you, right? The only way I can unleash a genocide on other human beings is if I consider them less than human.
Hmm. Yes, yes. And this connects to insaniyat, right, Raghu? Like you captured the essence
True.
of it in the word insaniyat.
True.
Do you want to share, if you can share a bit about that? The idea of
Yeah,
insaniyat was,
just tell me more. Yeah, just tell me more.
yeah, just
Um,
that I remember in conversations with you and your work with Barefoot in Tess and just the idea of
yeah, we use the word
insaniyat.
insaniyat. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because
So,
we do a lot of work with grassroots development out there, and one of the problems with this developmental work on the whole is that uh, development assumes that you are going to meet somebody who's undeveloped, underdeveloped,
yes,
and somehow you have to develop these people,
yes.
right? But if you really go there with an open heart and say there's another human being, let me not impose my idea of development on this person. Let me see what that person thinks is an idea of development, right? Then you have to approach it from humanness, not from development,
Hmm. Yes, yes,
right?
yes, yes. So that
But one of the
humanness.
problems, no, one
Hmm.
of the problems today is that so much of this, westernized idea of civilization and all of this is so deeply seeped into people that when you go to the ground, right, what they value are all these strange things which actually take them away from their own roots,
Yes, yes,
right? We're
yes.
paying a very heavy price for not having discovered what it means to actually develop our own genius,
Hmm. Hmm.
because the only way you can really develop is if you're completely integrated with yourself. You cannot put in something else on top of this and call it development.
It seems like what's happening in the world is also happening to individuals, where
Of course.
instead of
Of
innately
course.
finding our genius, we're
Exactly.
loading on top of.
Loading, yeah, and saying I must grow in your form.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
With that is matsariam, that's envy. That's
Right.
not growth, that's not respect, that's just pure envy.
Right.
And envy cannot help you to grow.
True. True. That's not the right trigger for growth. The
Not the right
innate
trigger.
desire to grow itself, I feel, is the right.
Yeah, you'll become like like Duryodhana if you're just too caught with envy.
Yes, yes, yes. So I feel on the note of humanness that we came up with, I think just the idea that it's very human to have shadows and to own them and to explore them rather than othering them. I think that's where what I'm gathering from.
Abhishek, it's human to have several capabilities and several possibilities in the self.
Okay.
It is wrong civilizational ideas that create shadows.
Ah, okay. Okay.
Yeah. Let me just tell you a small story, which is a very popular story, completely screwed up on the Facebook. Yeah, there's an old story about two wolves. Okay, so the story is told sometimes in a Zen context, but apparently it's originally a Native American story. So I read a version which was written by a person who was very angry about how it's been distorted. The original story is about this young boy who says, there are two wolves in me, one is black and one is white. Which one is going to win, and so on. So the distorted story is it depends on whether you feed the white or you feed the black. The wise story is know how to feed the white wolf, know how to feed the black wolf, and keep them both in your control. Know when to use the white and know when to use the black.
Ah, right.
That's the original American Indian story. So when you civilize this Native American, you make him feel that only the white dog should be alive, and the black dog should be killed. And then you start creating shadows. So we have to question our whole idea of civilization. What does it mean to be civilized? Right? Is owning atom bombs a sign of civilization? Yeah. Is the fact of having committed the biggest genocides so far and then not owning it up at all a sign of civilization? What is civilization? Is having a big car being civilized?
So the roots go all the way deep to civilizational questions, is what I'm gathering there.
Correct.
And I think the pathway to dialoguing with each other, to reduce the fragmentation, and to maybe even celebrate the poles and the diversity of life.
Yeah. You
is,
have to,
is
man.
yes, it's probably a pathway. So I'm going to ask you any final thoughts, Raghu, and I'm going to open this up for the audience if they have questions. The chat box is available for you to just drop in any
The
reflections, any questions.
the easiest way of actually looking at shadows is the extent of one's own narcissism.
Okay.
Right? If you think the reflection in the mirror is the most beautiful thing under the sun, and you get caught with too much narcissism, you can be absolutely sure that you're hiding a hell of a lot of your own crap in Pandora's box. It's gonna stink. It's soon gonna stink like mad. Yeah, if you didn't put it in Pandora's box, it would become fertilizer.
Okay. It can be used
Things will
as
grow.
fertilizer.
Things will
and to
grow.
True. True. That's a
Yeah.
nice one. Yeah. That's a nice one as well. So just want to open up with the audience. So I want to, just want to open it up for the audience also to ask questions or just even share reflections. I think you're welcome to do that as well. And you have the chat and we have the voice. So feel free to just share if it evokes. Evocations are also welcome. I'm guessing just whatever gets evoked, whatever questions come up. We have another 7 minutes, Raghu. Is that okay? We can go on till a bit longer, right?
Another 15 minutes.
15 minutes is fine.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So we can open this conversation up with others, I think, and be good to hear from others what this evoked, what kind of questions this brought up, how does it resonate in your own experience as well, and that would be nice. Uh, Meanwhile, also wanted to share we are planning to do an exploration into shadows coming in April. I'm going to just put some details into the chat box as well. And I remember also in the Mahabharat immersion, we did a process of looking at the other, then looking at you, and then owning that process up. And I think that was also powerful. Owning the shadow. Would that also be owning the shadow process?
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah, so I think Mahabharat immersion also has a process around owning some of these sites in a celebratory way. I'm going to just drop some details in the chat box while we wait for others to share uh, share their questions and reflections.
There seems to be one hand up. Chetan Roy.
Yes, Chetan, do you want to? You can use voice, Chetan, go for it.
No. Unmask yourself. Let me see.
Okay, so face.
Who's speaking?
Face.
Yeah.
Sure. So no chats, face.
No stamp boxes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's horrible, man.
Sure. So Chetan, if you can just show your face, maybe even a line or two about you, and so there's also context that Raghu has, and then maybe the question.
Sure, I'm not able to show my face because when I click on start video, it says the host is disabled video.
Oh, sorry. Then okay. I have to just give
your photograph is not. Oh yeah.
Yes.
You have to.
I think Chetan, video. You can do that now. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So just a couple of things. Raghu, first of all, it was a pleasure to hear you speak again. I heard you speak sometime last year, and I really enjoyed that time as well. And so I've actually grown up in India, born and brought up here, but I've lived for about 21 years abroad in the US, the UK, Asia, worked in all these different countries, and I come back to India. I've been in India for the last 11 years now, working out here, working in the corporate space, companies like Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, Citibank, so on. But I've grown up in a family that was my father's family was very westernized, extremely anglicized. They were part of the Brahmo Samaj community, so reformists and all of that. And on my mother's side, extremely devout Hindu people. So it's been a very interesting sort of dichotomy for me to grow up. But a lot of what you said has been my own learning over the years about civilization and colonization and the destruction that's been caused to old civilization with ancient wisdom that's embedded, that has been sort of masked down and passed away. And only now is it beginning to re-emerge as, I guess, colonization starts to wither away slowly and steadily. The point you made about causing genocide and not owning up, for example, what the British did with the Bengal famine, that eventually they don't own up to, right? Yeah. What the Spanish did in South America and so on. It's almost like the story of the Asuras in a way. That the Asuras,
absolutely,
of what we see in our mythology, right?
Yeah.
And when you're talking about the shadow, I'm studying astrology, but I was studying the mythology of India, our old stories through that. And so Sun or Surya had two wives. His first wife was Sanjana, and she went away, and she left her Chaya in place with Sun, and from that was born Shani or Saturn, the dispenser of our karmas. So it tells you to some extent, kind of what you're saying, right? That when the Chaya is there and you don't face up to your Chaya, you can get a Saturn, a dispenser.
And Saturn is a good guy. Yeah, Saturn teaches you a lot of things. Yeah.
He gives you a good karmas too, but he's also the guy who you're always a little bit nervous about.
No, Chetan, you have to own up to your karmas. You can't run away from them. So Saturn is a great teacher. Saturn is also called the greatest teacher. Na? Jupiter is a kind teacher. He lets you run away. Saturn doesn't let you run away.
He makes sure you learn. Even if you put your nose in the ground.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking of that story and how even our mythology has things like that.
Absolutely.
But I had one question for you, because since you've been doing work in the corporate space, since I've come back to India, of course I've worked in corporations all over the world, but I feel that in India we've obviously superimposed the Western idea of corporate and leadership, and how to run an organization.
Yeah, we have.
And I feel that it's culturally so different from who we are. And I'm wondering, do corporates have a future in India, or how do you bring in that Indian?
No. See, Chetan, what I've seen in organizations is a very peculiar thing. See, first of all, I'm working with this Mahabharata idea, and wherever I go and work, people enjoy it. They understand what these five mean and whatever, right? And it's a very sad thing that, most Indians actually have a very strong nakula, which is a very strong service orientation, a community building orientation. They'll go and read somebody, Strength Finder or something that says they're not assertive enough and want to become assertive, which is impossible.
That's right.
Right? So rather than value yourself, you start trying to become somebody else. So there are these kind of stupidities that happen. But the other thing that I've seen happening is incredibly jugaad ways by which the actual Indian reality is what is there underlying Indian organizations. That's what makes them really thrive. I haven't seen a single organization that relies on anything other than consensus building before they promote people beyond a certain level.
That's right.
There's no performance appraisal and all that is okay up to a certain level, but beyond that, it's always consensus building. That's a very Indian thing to do. Right? And there's so many ways in which this happens. But the sad thing is we distort this underlying process to make it appear as though it fits the Western model. So there's a huge waste of energy in this process. Yeah, there's a huge waste of energy, right? So maybe we will wake up and not throw it overboard. Yeah, because more and more there are papers that are being written about this, and there's a greater appreciation that there's something about the Indian way of managing that makes sense. Yeah, but I'm very certain of this. The day we throw this mask out and own up to who we are, we don't have to waste our energy trying to be somebody else when we're actually managing in a different way. Like all distribution networks in India are completely trust based.
Correct.
You try to bring in measurement into that and you kill it. Yeah, you can't. I mean, if I'm selling with you and we have a relationship for 20 years, I suddenly put metrics on you and destroy the trust. It won't work, man. We're not a
I agree.
transactional society. And if I don't have the sense of trust with you, numbers is not going to make a difference.
Yeah, and
I had one more thing, Chetan. Sorry,
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that, I mean, even the private limited or public limited as a structure, and like British East India Company being the first company structure, the structure itself, like the legal entity itself, I
It's
feel
Indian.
it creates something there, right?
Yeah, it does. But EID Parry is one of the oldest companies in the world. It's in India. Forbes and Campbell is one of the oldest companies in the world that's
I think
living
so.
on
What
Indian
Raghu
soil.
was saying was
No,
that
but the
is,
issue is
yeah.
not that. The issue is not that, Abhishek. The issue is the reality is 90% of businesses are family run all over the world. There are these big conglomerates, so everybody's talking about that. But most organizations, especially the smaller you go, the more they are family run. So in India, the problem is there's a very uneasy kind of a relationship between the familial ways of running things and the so-called structural, so-called modern. Right? The earlier we resolve it, the more powerful we're going to become. Yeah, because there are so many wise ways. I mean, we've been in business for ages, man.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we were the richest country in the world for a long, long time because we had good banias. We had value adding management long back. We had, cash flow based accounting way back. The problem is it's called Marwari banking. But today, what you do in cash flow accounting and all of that, yes, Chetan, is completely Marwari, man.
Absolutely.
Yes.
In fact, they can teach many things to the Western people in
Of
terms
course,
of.
they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's hear other
Thanks for
people.
that.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Thanks, Chetan. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Any evocations? We can also turn on cameras of everyone, actually. I think it's a good time to turn on the lights and see everybody around. And yeah, so feel free to turn on your cameras, others also. It'd be good to slowly start seeing the faces of people here. And yeah, open to the next question. So please feel free to unmute and just ask freely.
Hi Raghu, this is Akanksha here. It was amazing listening to you. I think I'm going to go back to this talk multiple times because every time I'm sure there's more and more to ruminate over, and it resonated very deeply. So thank you for that, for sharing. I have a question about shadow self, and I hear you when you say that we have all of these inside us, and just our willingness to be able to see it, that this is also me and this is also me, and owning that. But how do I, and you spoke about the two wolves and knowing when to feed each and when to use it. So I'm just curious to know, how does one use the shadow self? As in, if I realize, for
There is
instance,
no such thing, Akanksha. The
uh,
moment you know how to feed both, there is no shadow self. There is
they're
nothing that
both
is
me.
being, They are both you. And they're both available energies. Nothing is kept under the wraps. Nothing is being tied up and starved. And I'm able to make a choice of what part of me I should show. Right? Just
So then
imagine,
they become
Aksha.
energies.
Yeah, just imagine. There's a stupid guy next to you. Right? Are you going to say, no, 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 I'm such a nice person, I'm not going to do anything? Take out your slipper and hammer the bloody guy, yeah? But, yeah, like Abhishek started, he will say anger is a shadow. Anger is not a shadow. Right? If you haven't, if you've suppressed this anger for a long time, you won't just hit him with your slipper. You'll kill him.
Wow. Okay. That's what you meant by overpowering. It takes over.
Yeah. So that is when it becomes krodha. Whereas that same energy, if it's used at the right time in the right way, is a very important energy to use. Yeah. So go and learn some Tai Chi and learn some karate. Yeah. It's useful.
Agreed. Agreed. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Raghu. The chat box has a question from Kejal. Kejal, do you want to ask it directly rather than me reading from the chat box? Or are you traveling and it's better if I read it? I think she's traveling. So I'll read it, is what she says. So the question, Raghu, is how do you look at the current mental health challenges emerging? Feeling is one not enough and the idea of narcissism. So the feeling that one is not enough. So like you said, narcissism, there seems to be also the feeling that one is not enough and the mental health challenges that come from feeling that. And how do you look at them?
See, these are all conflated. I don't want to go into details. What is narcissism? What is not? This, that, and the other. See, there's a very simple reality is that the current paradigm of development is based on making people consume what they don't need. The entire advertising industry, the whole process of what is called economy and what is called GDP works on advertising. Right? Now, what do you have to do to advertise? I first have to make you feel you're not good enough. Right? So I keep on pushing this idea. You're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not good enough on the one side. And on the other side, I give you other triggers, through various, other ways of making you feel alone. And that me as an individual with rights, and you push all of these. It's a complex narrative that is being pushed, which actually at the one side is making you continuously feel not good enough. On the other side is valorizing acts of extraction. If you boil it down, this is what is happening in the current discourse most of the time. Right? The most successful people are not the people who are doing things that are good for the world. The most successful people are the people who have extracted so much that they own more money than a couple of countries. Right? So all of these things together are creating this huge complex issue. Right? So I don't think, in a couple of minutes, we're going to be able to give any solutions for this. Right? We have to look at this carefully. We have to, examine it much more.
Sure. Yes. Thanks for that, Raghu. We are also catching up on 5th for a wisdom circle, like a circle to continue this conversation, but more a dialogue amongst all of us, and just continuing to talk about this theme. So hopefully we'll get some space to together reflect on all of this as well. And that's also open to everyone to join in as well. That's on the 5th. Okay, we have time for maybe one last question. We have just a few minutes.
Hi.
And we have one question in the chat box from Ranu, I think, and somebody has unmuted. So we'll probably be able to take any one of those. So Jesse, do you want to take it, or should we go to Ranu since you have...
Okay, let's go to Ranu. That's fine.
Sure, Jesse. Okay, great. Ranu is asking, if I operate from the space of honesty and integrity, what could be lying in its shadow? Is shadow always the opposite? If so, then how can the shadow of honesty be valuable? If I'm whole, I must be corrupt too.
Yeah, I mean, what's the big deal about it? I don't understand the question. See, you're first creating a binary of honesty and dishonesty. I don't know what is the criterion for honesty and dishonesty. And then you're posing the question.
Right. So in the question itself, you are saying
there is a problem there.
Yeah,
so if you read Joseph Campbell, he will tell you that the greatest heroes in almost every civilization was the trickster hero. And thank God we haven't whitewashed him. We call him Krishna. We blackwashed him. And we celebrate the guy. Right? You cannot survive in the jungle, if you don't have the ability to be contextually relevant and do what is contextually right with the greatest possible capability that you have. You can't be moralistic and survive. So the idea of honesty was brought in to create pliable employees, to create armies of people who will obey you. Sure. Okay, while the kings lead very corrupt lives. Yeah, George Bernard Shaw has written a lot about the honesty of the middle class.
Great. I think that's enough of a pointer, I think, for the person asking the question. Thanks for that, Raghu. And I think the intention Kranti is saying is we need more programs in the US. And I totally endorse, I think, Raghu, your voice. I wish we can get it to as many corners of the world, not only the US, I would say, in fact, in Africa and South America as well. I mean, in places where there is decolonization that needs to happen. So I think that's one intent that I have as well. And yeah, just want to thank you so much for being here, Raghu, for your very valuable time. Great fun, and hopefully just inviting everybody to also spread this talk all around. I think there's so much wisdom in this one talk. And thanks, Raghu. It's a privilege. It's a privilege to have you and have all this access. So thank you so much. Thanks a lot for
being here. Okay, I had fun. I hope everybody else had fun too.
Yes, it was good. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Yes, bye.
See you people. Bye-bye.